Hello students, welcome once again to my channel Dr. Kushumita Edu Learning Portal. Where we have been covering our syllabus of Indian English writing for the past 8 weeks, and in our course of studies we have covered various aspects of this chapter, where we had initially learned about the evolution of Indian writing in English poetry, and we have dealt with the first phase of writing beginning with Henry Louis Vivian de Rosio, moving on to Michael Madhusudan Dutt, Manmohan Ghosh, Sri Aurobindo Rabindranath Tagore, and the like. We have also discussed pre-independence poetry, post-independence poetry. We have discussed the thematic aspects of Indian English poetry. For example, the theme of Indianness in the poetry of Toru Dotto and R. Parthasarathi. Similarly, the aspect of the position of women in respect to the poetry of Kamala Das, Leela Roy, Monica Verma, and Gauri Deshpande. Now today we are going to discuss the portrayal of the theme of marriage in Indian English poetry. Before we move on to the poems, let us see why marriage is still relevant. It is not hard to notice that the reason to get married is primarily social, but the reason of getting divorced is, in most cases, personal. The alarming rise in the number of divorces over the last few years, along with incidents of dowry debts at the other end of the spectrum, impels us to revisit over and over again the feasibility of the institution of marriage. Now, before I move into a direct discussion of the poems that I have decided to teach you, let us look into how R.K. Narayan, a renowned Indian English novelist, has considered this theme in his novels. He has drawn accolades for his lively portraits of persecuted women tortured by their husbands in his novels. For example, Savitri in The Dark Room and Rosie in The Guide. But he has also dared to traverse the untrodden path by portraying Daisy, that rebellious woman who did the unthinkable by running away from marriage to avoid having children, in the book The Painter of Science. Narayan has also given us vivid portraits of husbands. The most memorable of them would have to be Krishna in The English Teacher, who becomes suicidal after the death of his wife and experiences a moment of rare immutable joy when he is finally able to mystically communicate with his deceased wife. So where we see in Narayan's novels that men are trying to reunite with the dead wives, the women on the other hand are trying to give up on marriage because they feel persecuted, they feel shackled by the demands of domesticity. Similarly, Raman in The Painter of Science is unable to give up on his love interest Daisy and promises that she will always be welcome whenever she decided to return. These are the few posters that I am going to share with you of Narayan's Dark Room and Narayan's The Guide. I am sure most of you have seen this movie, very remarkable movie. Now let us move into Indian English poetry. Indian English poetry too is not a stranger to the theme of persecuted spouses. I am not talking about specifically husbands or specifically wives. I am talking about both sides. From the gigantic spectrum stretching over many decades, this paper would attempt to choose a few Indian poets writing in English to depict how, in their works, marriage has appeared to be more often than not a matter of pain than of joy. First poet is Kamala Das. I have already discussed with you, but still for a recap I would like to tell you, Kamala Das is chiefly known as a Malayalam poet who was popular as an author of English poetry, and won the Sahitya Akademi Award in the year 1985. She was born in the Malabar district in 1934 and passed away in 2009, leaving behind many volumes of remarkable poetry. She is identified by critics as one of the more prominent Indian feminists. Her poetry teems with the unshed tears of women who have been vehemently kept in shackles by the Indian society. Now, this is a picture of Kamala Das that I would like to share with you people. Her poem Introduction is an autobiographical account of how she herself was victimized time and again for belonging to the weaker sex. Kamala Das begins the poem by asking to be left alone in the matter of her choice of language. Why not leave me alone, critics, friends, visiting cousins, every one of you? Why not let me speak in any language I like? She tries to point out how personal choices, like the choice of a language, is often subject to the unwelcome suggestion of outsiders, all because she is not considered good enough to choose for herself based on her gender. Das next goes on to comment how she was sexually abused on the pretext of marriage when she was barely a 16-year-old girl. This left such a deep impact on her mind and body that she became wary of her own femininity. She says, I wore a shirt and my brother's trousers, cut my hair short, and ignored my womanliness. This again drew a lot of criticism from all those around her. Kamala Das craftily avoids mentioning the gender of those who taunted her, thus indicating that patriarchy is not practiced solely by males. If I read out a few more lines for you, she recounts the way in which she was attacked for shunning her womanliness. Dress in saris, be girl, be wife, they said, be embroiderer, be cook, be a quarreller with servants. Fit in, oh, belong, cried the categorizers. Das ends the poem by declaring, I too call myself I, thereby highlighting that she has not bent down to the prescribed notion of Indian womanhood. Meena Kendaswamy. Now, let us remember that she is not a contemporary of Kamala Das, rather she is more of a contemporary to our generation. Kendaswamy is a contemporary Indian poet writing in English who was born in Chennai in 1984. An analysis of her poetry books Touch and Miss Militancy in the Journal of Post-Colonial Cultures and Societies comes to the conclusion that Meena authors a poetic discourse that not only castigates the prevalent modes of subjugation, but also resolutely strives towards futures that are yet to be born. One example of how scathing her poetry can be is seen in the poem Composition. Here Kendaswamy draws a parallel between the beating and the composition of a poem, where she is able to feel the poem singeing through her body, and she compares it to the composition of poetry. This is a picture of Meena Kendaswamy, and this is the poem that I was talking about. When you wait for the audacious game to strike your skin, poetry dictates itself. In your mind, short lines rip through like bullets from a machine gun. The cane thrashes before you scream or shake. The poetry stops, laid to rest, much before the composition is complete. This poem is called Dead Woman Walking. Once I was a wife, beautiful, married to a merchant, shifty-eyed, living the life until he was lost in listless doubt of how what I gave him was more delicious than whatever had been given to me. This discrepancy drove him away. A new job in another city. He hitched himself to a formless wife. Of course, as all women do, I found out. Now, We are going to talk about Nissim Ezekiel, the Sahitya Academy Award-winning poet. Nissim Ezekiel was born in 1924 at Mumbai. He is best known for the Indian aura that he lends to his poems. Shirish Chinhade, in his book Five Indian English Poets, has observed Ezekiel, for instance, can respond best to the urban contemporary India, and the tongue-in-cheek is the chief strategy with which he shapes his experience. It is with his tongue-in-cheek in frank familiar comments upon the trials and tribulations faced by the common Indian man in his poem Case Study. This is a picture of Nissim Ezekiel from the book called Nissim Ezekiel Panorama of Indian Life and Culture by Dr. B. Parvita and Adi Ramesh Babu. I'm sure you would like to have a look if you want to know more about Nissim Ezekiel. Now, this is a few lines I would like to quote from his poem. His marriage was the worst mistake of all. Although he loved his children when they came, he spoiled them too with just that extra doll or discipline which drove them to the wall. His wife and changing servants did the same. A man is damned in that domestic game. The poem concludes with an advice from the speaker, who appears to be a mouthpiece of the poet. The troubled man is advised to change the pattern with a sudden jerk. The married man in question then applies to the monotony more than of anything else, monotony of marriage than anything else. So it is basically the married man is talking about the monotony in marriage, and the married woman, however, is talking about the abuse that she has to face as a wife. Jayanta Mahapatra, another Indian English poet, was the first Indian English poet to receive the Sahitya Academy Award in 1981. He was born in Odisha in 1928. In his essay entitled Jayanta Mahapatra and the Poetics of Pain, Niranjan Mahanti has spoken about Mahapatra, enumerating how the poet is engulfed by the pain in people's life. The note of pain, suffering, springs from the poet's perception of society, and it makes the poems full of misery, possibly with the assessment that the jejune real world cannot be redeemed and saved from its present decadence. This is a picture of Jayanta Mahapatra. This is a poem by him where he says, "My notebooks are there, my pretty wife too, but I have been with them long, long in love, and they have worn me slowly round the edges." As in the case of Ezekiel's case study, the speaker of Mahapatra's waiting too is suffering because of the familiarity that has bred contempt to the proximity in marriage. So it is a known conundrum that familiarity beats contempt. The same thing has happened in the case of Jayanta Mahapatras. And in conclusion, I would like to say the above discussion dealing with the 5 major Indian poets writing in English has made one thing clear, that men and women have a different approach towards marriage. Women tend to complain about the strictures laid upon them after marriage, about how they are ill-treated by their husbands and in-laws. On the other hand, men have a different set of complaints about marriage, but in their case it is mostly about being bogged down by the demands of domesticity, while in the case of women it is more about being tortured and being shackled by the domestic norms. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you for being a part of this course. Hope to meet you again real soon. Bye bye.